The massive observation deck of the Imperial Dreadnought Eternal Dominion hummed with anticipation. Admiral Zexthera adjusted her ceremonial armor, the crystalline plates catching the light of distant stars as she gazed through the reinforced viewport at the small blue-green world below. Beside her stood Ambassador Veltar, his 6 arms folded in what humans might mistake for prayer, but was actually the Kytherian gesture of supreme confidence. Such a primitive little world, Veltar mused, his translator converting his melodic clicks into standard Galactic. Hard to believe they've managed to achieve basic spaceflight without our guidance. Admiral Zexthera's mandibles clicked in amusement. In her 3 centuries of service to the Galactic Empire, she had overseen the integration of 47 species into the fold. Each time, the process followed the same predictable pattern. First came the awe, then gratitude for being elevated from their savage ways, followed by eager compliance as they desperately sought to prove themselves worthy of Imperial citizenship. The preliminary scans show they call themselves humans, she said, reading from her tactical display. Carbon-based, bilateral symmetry, single brain case. Standard primate, evolution track. Their technology level is adequate for integration into the outer territories. The bridge crew, representing a dozen different Imperial species, watched with practiced boredom. This was routine. Another backwater species to be absorbed into the Empire's endless expansion. The humans have been observed for several planetary rotations now, their crude radio signals cataloged, their military capabilities assessed. Like every other primitive species, they pose no threat to Imperial interests. Shall I prepare the standard integration protocols? Asked Communications Officer Drex, her insectoid features betraying no emotion. Historical documentation shows 97.3% compliance rates when we demonstrate our technological superiority. Proceed, Admiral Zexthera confirmed. Begin with the atmospheric display. Let them see what they're dealing with. On the planet's surface, Dr. Sarah Chun stared at her computer screen in disbelief. The radio telescope array had been tracking unusual signals for weeks, but this was beyond anything they had anticipated. The readings were impossible to ignore or explain away as solar interference. Marcus, you need to see this, she called to her colleague across the laboratory. Dr. Marcus Webb, the project's lead astronomer, hurried over, his coffee still steaming in the early morning air. What are we looking at? He asked, adjusting his glasses as he peered at the data streams cascading down the monitor. Multiple large objects in high orbit. The gravitational signatures alone suggest artificial construction on a scale we can barely comprehend. They're not hiding anymore. Marcus, whatever's up there wants us to know they're here. Around the globe, similar discoveries were being made. The Arecibo Observatory, SETI installations across 6 continents, and even amateur radio enthusiasts were picking up the signals. Within hours, emergency sessions were being called in government buildings from Washington to Beijing, from Moscow to New Delhi. President Harrison sat in the Situation Room, surrounded by advisors whose faces reflected the same mixture of wonder and terror that gripped the entire planet. General Morrison, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, was speaking in clipped military tones. Satellite imagery confirms at least 12 massive vessels in various orbital positions. Each one is roughly the size of Manhattan. Our best analysts estimate they could house populations in the hundreds of thousands. Any hostile movements? The president asked, his voice carefully controlled. None detected. They're just waiting. Secretary of State Elizabeth Hawthorne leaned forward. Mr. President, we need to consider that this could be a first contact scenario. We should prepare peaceful overtures. General Morrison's jaw tightened. With respect, ma'am, we should prepare for every scenario. Our nuclear arsenals are on standby, and all military personnel worldwide are at DEFCON 2. Above them, aboard the Eternal Dominion, the Imperial fleet prepared for what they considered a routine demonstration. The atmospheric projection system powered up, casting holographic displays across Earth's sky that would be visible to every human on the daylight side of the planet. The message was simple, transmitted in mathematical concepts that any spacefaring species should understand. submission in exchange for technological advancement. But as the Imperial fleet began their display, something unexpected happened. Instead of the usual awed silence or panic communications they had grown accustomed to from primitive species, the humans did something that had never occurred in 3,000 years of Imperial expansion. They smiled. Not all of them, of course. Many humans reacted with appropriate fear or wonder. But scattered across the globe, in laboratories and military installations, in the homes of science fiction fans, and the offices of aerospace engineers, humans looked up at the massive alien vessels and grinned with an expression that the Empire's xenobiologists would later struggle to classify. It was the smile of a species that had spent centuries dreaming of this moment. The smile of a people who had written countless stories about alien contact, who had imagined every possible scenario, who had planned and theorized and hoped for exactly this day. It was the smile of a species that had never quite fit the mold of primitive that the Empire expected. Dr. Chun was one of those smiling humans. As she watched the holographic message materialize in Earth's atmosphere, she turned to Marcus with an expression of pure excitement. "They're using quantum-entangled particles for the projection matrix," she said, her voice filled with scientific enthusiasm rather than fear. "Do you realize what this means? If we can reverse engineer even a fraction of that technology." Marcus nodded, his own excitement building. "Sarah, call the International Space Station. If they're willing to talk, we need to be ready with our best people." This reaction puzzled the Imperial observers. Species faced with overwhelming technological superiority typically responded with worship, fear, or desperate attempts at appeasement. The humans were doing something unprecedented. They were analyzing. Admiral Zexthera watched the global communication networks with growing confusion. Instead of governments falling to their knees or military forces preparing hopeless last stands, she observed something that made her mandibles click nervously. Human scientists were sharing data across political boundaries with unprecedented cooperation. Military leaders were coordinating responses not for feudal resistance, but for organized communication protocols. "Ambassador," she said to Veltar, "something is irregular about this species." Veltar's 6 arms gestured dismissively. "Impossible. The sociological models are perfect. Every species follows the same integration pattern. Perhaps they simply need a more impressive demonstration." "Begin Phase 2 of the integration protocol," Admiral Zexthera ordered. "Deploy the technology samplers." Across Earth's major cities, smaller Imperial craft descended from the motherships. Each vessel, still massive by human standards, but mere shuttles compared to the dreadnoughts above, touched down in carefully selected locations. From each craft emerged beings that represented the diversity of the Galactic Empire. The towering, crystalline Zarathi, the graceful, tentacled Moldari, the insectoid Kresh, and dozens of other species. The standard protocol called for a display of Imperial technology that would render local populations helpless with awe. Force fields, gravity manipulation, energy weapons that could level mountains, medical devices that could cure any known disease within minutes. The demonstration typically lasted exactly 1 standard Imperial hour, after which local leaders would inevitably request audience to discuss terms of surrender and integration. But as the Imperial forces began their technological display, the human response continued to deviate from every known pattern. In New York City, where a Zarathi delegation had landed in Central Park, Dr. Maria Rodriguez approached the alien's force field barrier with a handheld device of her own. The Zarathi commander, and used to such boldness, watched in fascination as the human scientist began taking readings. "Fascinating," Dr. Rodriguez muttered, more to herself than to the imposing crystalline being watching her. "Localized gravitational field manipulation. The power source must be incredible, but the field harmonics suggest it's actually quite energy efficient." The Zarathi commander, whose name roughly translated to destroyer of rebellious thoughts, found himself in the unprecedented position of being studied rather than worshipped. According to every textbook in the Imperial Academy, primitive species were supposed to cower before such displays. Similar scenes played out across the globe. In Tokyo, human engineers were sketching diagrams of Imperial gravity lift technology. In London, physicists were debating the theoretical implications of Imperial faster-than-light communication systems. In Geneva, linguists were already working to decode the mathematical foundations of the universal translator technology. Nowhere on Earth were humans falling to their knees in worship or terror. Instead, they were doing something that the Galactic Empire had not encountered in 3 millennia of expansion. They were learning. The implications of this began to dawn on Admiral Zexthera as she reviewed the global observation reports. In every previous integration, the technological demonstration phase resulted in immediate submission. Primitive species, overwhelmed by Imperial capabilities, recognized their inferiority and gratefully accepted their place in the galactic hierarchy. But humans seem to view Imperial technology not as proof of their own inadequacy, but as puzzles to be solved, challenges to be met, and examples to be improved upon. The neural scans of human population centers showed not the expected patterns of awe and submission, but the distinctive brainwave signatures of intense curiosity and problem-solving determination. Admiral, Communications Officer Drex reported, her compound eyes reflecting concern. We're receiving communication attempts from the human government centers. They're requesting formal diplomatic contact. Requesting. Admiral Zexthera's mandibles clicked in confusion. They should be begging for mercy. The transmissions appear to follow established, interspecies diplomatic protocols. They're treating this as a first contact situation between equals. Ambassador Veltar's 6 arms writhed in agitation. Equals? Preposterous. They haven't even achieved faster-than-light travel. Their weapons are crude chemical explosives. Their longest-lived individuals barely survive 100 planetary rotations. But even as he spoke, reports continued to flow in from the surface teams. Human scientists were not just observing Imperial technology, they were beginning to understand it. In several locations, humans had already constructed crude, but functional replicas of basic Imperial devices. Their progress was impossible according to every sociological model in the Imperial database. On the surface, the initial shock of first contact was giving way to something the Empire had never encountered: organized human curiosity. Dr. Chun and her team had established communication with their counterparts in 43 countries. They were sharing data, pooling resources, and working together with an efficiency that impressed even their alien visitors. "Look at this," Dr. Chin said to her international colleagues via secure video conference. The power distribution patterns in their force fields suggest they're using some kind of zero-point energy extraction. If we can figure out the frequency modulation. Around the world, similar conversations were taking place. Humanity's greatest minds were tackling the challenge of understanding alien technology with the same determination their ancestors had brought to splitting the atom and reaching the moon. But unlike those previous challenges, this one came with living teachers, whether the aliens realized it or not. The Imperial surface teams found themselves in an increasingly awkward position. They had been trained to receive worship and desperate pleas for technological gifts. Instead, they were being asked polite but probing questions by humans who showed no inclination toward subservience. "Excuse me," a human called Dr. Williams said to the Moldari delegation in London, "but I couldn't help noticing that your translation devices seem to work by analyzing neural patterns rather than just processing auditory input. That's remarkable. Could you explain the theoretical framework behind that approach?" The Moldari commander, whose tentacles change color with emotional state, displayed the deep purple hues of complete bewilderment. In 3 centuries of integration operations, no primitive being had ever asked for theoretical frameworks. They were supposed to beg for healing technology or protection from their enemies, not request lectures on xenoneural interface design. As the first day of contact drew to a close, Admiral Zexthera found herself facing a crisis that her extensive military training had never prepared her for. The humans were not integrating according to any known pattern. They weren't worshiping the Empire as gods. They weren't cowering in terror at imperial might. And they certainly weren't surrendering their independence in exchange for technological advancement. Instead, they were doing something unprecedented in the history of galactic civilization. They were treating the Empire as equals who had simply developed different technological solutions to common problems. Worse still, they were learning those solutions at a rate that defied every known scientific model of primitive species development. Ambassador, Admiral Zextra said to Veltar, her voice carrying undertones of concern that resonated through the ship's hull, I believe we may need to reconsider our approach to this integration. Veltar's 6 arms gestured in the pattern indicating absolute confidence, but his bioluminescent patches flickered with uncertainty. Impossible, Admiral. The models are perfect. They've worked for 3,000 years. These humans will submit like all the others. They simply need more time to comprehend their situation. But as reports continued to stream in from across the globe, one thing became increasingly clear to the Imperial observers. Humanity's smiles were not fading. If anything, they were becoming more frequent, more confident, and more unsettling to beings who had never encountered a species that viewed first contact with aliens as an opportunity rather than a catastrophe. The stage was set for something that would shake the foundations of the Galactic Empire, a meeting between unstoppable expansion and immovable human curiosity. And for the first time in their long history of conquest, the Empire was about to discover what happened when they encountered a species that refused to be impressed by their superiority. The humans were still smiling, and that smile was about to change everything. The second week of first contact brought revelations that sent shockwaves through the Imperial command structure. What had begun as a routine integration operation was rapidly becoming the most significant challenge to Imperial doctrine in recorded history. Admiral Zextra stood before a holographic assembly of the Empire's high command, her mandibles clicking nervously as she delivered her report. The assembled beings, representing the apex of galactic civilization, listened with growing disbelief to her account of human behavior. Impossible, declared High Admiral Torvex, his massive crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into prismatic patterns. No primitive species has ever demonstrated such rapid technological adaptation. Your reports must be contaminated by equipment malfunction. I have verified the data 17 times, High Admiral, Zextra replied. The humans are not following any known integration pattern. They've reverse-engineered basic force field technology in less than 10 standard cycles. Their learning curve exceeds theoretical maximums by factors that should be impossible. The chamber filled with the multi-harmonic sounds of disbelief from dozens of species. The Galactic Empire had been built on the fundamental premise that technological development followed predictable patterns. Advanced species naturally dominated primitive ones, bringing order and civilization to chaos. This hierarchy was the foundation of everything they understood about galactic society. But humans were shattering that foundation with every passing day. On Earth, the initial wonder of first contact had evolved into something far more dangerous to imperial interests: organized human determination. Dr. Sarah Chun had become the unofficial coordinator of what humanity was calling the Great Leap Forward, a global scientific initiative that made the Manhattan Project look like a high school science fair. We've confirmed that their faster-than-light communication system operates on quantum entanglement principles, but they're doing something with the quantum foam that we've never considered, she explained to the assembled representatives of 53 nations gathered in the Emergency United Nations session in Geneva. The Secretary General, a calm woman named Amara Okafor, leaned forward. Dr. Chun, what are the implications for our own technological development? Conservative estimates suggest we could achieve basic FDL communication within 6 months, Chun replied. Dr. Nakamura's team in Tokyo believes they can have a prototype quantum communicator operational within 30 days. Around the assembly hall, representatives from every major nation exchanged glances that mixed excitement with concern. The technological revolution that was sweeping Earth was unprecedented, but it was also destabilizing. Traditional power structures were becoming meaningless when revolutionary breakthroughs were happening daily in laboratories from Moscow to Mumbai. "What about the aliens' response to our progress?" asked the representative from the United Kingdom. Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "That's the interesting part. They seem confused. Yesterday, the delegation in Beijing actually asked our scientists to slow down their research. When Dr. Liu demonstrated our first successful gravity manipulation device, the aliens looked genuinely disturbed." This was an understatement. The Imperial surface teams were indeed disturbed, but disturbed failed to capture the existential crisis that was gripping their forces. For the first time in their history, they were watching a primitive species achieve in days what had taken their own civilization centuries to develop. Commander Zalthek of the Moldari delegation in Beijing had sent an emergency report to the fleet that was causing panic throughout the Imperial hierarchy. The humans hadn't just replicated basic Imperial technology, they had improved it. The gravitational manipulator they constructed operates at 12% higher efficiency than our standard models, his report stated. When I asked how they achieved this improvement, the human scientist, Dr. Liu, explained that they had optimized the quantum resonance patterns. When I requested elaboration, she provided mathematical formulae that our own engineers are struggling to comprehend. Similar reports were flooding in from every Imperial delegation on Earth. Humans weren't just learning alien technology. They were innovating upon it at a rate that defied explanation. Their approach to problem-solving was unlike anything in the Imperial database. Where established galactic species would spend decades carefully studying and gradually implementing new technologies, humans threw everything at every problem simultaneously. Their global information network meant that a breakthrough in one location was shared instantly with scientists everywhere, leading to exponential development rates that had never been observed before. Dr. Maria Rodriguez in New York had summed up the human approach in a way that terrified Imperial observers. Why choose between different solutions when you can try them all and see what works best? This philosophy was alien to the Empire's methodical, hierarchical approach to scientific development. In Imperial society, research followed careful protocols, with senior species guiding junior ones through predetermined development paths. The idea of allowing unrestricted experimentation by primitive minds was considered dangerous chaos. But chaos, as the humans were proving, could be remarkably effective. Admiral, Communications Officer Drex reported to Admiral Zexthera with barely contained alarm. "We're receiving requests from human governments to establish formal diplomatic relations. They're proposing mutual technology exchanges and collaborative research agreements." Admiral Zexthera's mandibles clicked in confusion. Collaborative research? They're a primitive species. What could they possibly offer us? The answer to that question was becoming increasingly uncomfortable for the Empire to contemplate. Reports from the surface teams indicated that human innovations were already surpassing Imperial standard equipment in several areas. Their approach to energy efficiency, in particular, was yielding results that Imperial scientists had never considered. "They think differently," Ambassador Veltar reported during his emergency briefing to the fleet command. "Their neural structures process information in patterns that don't match any known sentient species. Where we see discrete problems requiring systematic solutions, they see interconnected systems that can be optimized through simultaneous multivariable manipulation." This revelation was triggering emergency conferences throughout the Imperial fleet. The Empire's entire social structure was based on the premise that advanced species naturally guided primitive ones. The idea that primitive species might develop superior solutions to common problems challenged everything they believed about civilization itself. On Earth, humanity was blissfully unaware of the philosophical crisis they were causing. They were too busy having the time of their lives. Dr. Robert Harrison, a theoretical physicist from MIT, was working with his team to understand Imperial faster-than-light travel when he made a discovery that would send shockwaves through both human and alien scientific communities. The propulsion system they're using is incredibly sophisticated, he explained to his international colleagues during their daily global conference call. But it's also incredibly inefficient. They're brute forcing their way through space-time when there's a much more elegant solution. Elegant how? Asked Dr. Yuki Tanaka from Tokyo. Instead of creating massive gravitational distortions that require enormous energy expenditures, we could use micro-distortions in carefully calculated sequences. It's like the difference between breaking down a wall with a sledgehammer versus unlocking it with the right key. Within 72 hours, Dr. Harrison's theoretical framework had been tested, refined, and implemented by human scientists working around the clock in laboratories across the globe. The first human faster-than-light probe was launched exactly 3 weeks after first contact, achieving speeds that exceeded Imperial vessels by significant margins while using less than half the energy. The Imperial fleet watched in stunned silence as the primitive species they had come to integrate demonstrated technological capabilities that surpassed their own. "This is unprecedented," High Admiral Torvex declared during an emergency high command session. "In 3,000 years of expansion, we have never encountered a situation like this." "Perhaps," suggested Intelligence Coordinator Vexmar, his multifaceted eyes gleaming with concern, "we should consider that our fundamental assumptions about primitive species may be flawed." The suggestion sent ripples of unease through the assembled beings. The Empire's entire structure, their understanding of themselves, and their place in the galaxy was built on the principle that technological advancement followed predictable patterns, with older species naturally superior to younger ones. But humans were demonstrating that innovation could trump experience, that fresh perspectives could solve problems that established wisdom considered insurmountable. They weren't just learning Imperial technology, they were making it obsolete. The crisis deepened when human governments began making formal proposals for interstellar exploration. President Harrison, speaking for what was now being called the United Earth Coalition, addressed the Imperial fleet directly through their communication channels. "We appreciate your technological demonstrations," his message stated, "and we're grateful for the learning opportunities they've provided. We would like to propose a mutual exchange program. Our scientists are eager to share their innovations with your people, and we hope you'll consider collaborative research initiatives." The message was polite, respectful, and absolutely revolutionary. Never in the history of the Galactic Empire had a primitive species proposed to teach advanced civilizations anything. The concept was so foreign that Imperial linguists spent days confirming that their translation systems were functioning correctly. "They want to teach us," Ambassador Veltar reported, his 6 arms writhing with emotions that had no Imperial names. "A species that achieved spaceflight last week wants to share technological innovations with beings who have traveled the stars for millennia." The most disturbing aspect of the human proposals was that they might actually have something valuable to teach. Imperial scientists had begun secretly studying human innovations, and their reports were causing panic throughout the fleet's research divisions. Commander Thexera, the Empire's leading expert on propulsion systems, submitted a classified report that sent shockwaves through the command structure. Human FTL technology demonstrates efficiency improvements of 40 to 60% over standard Imperial systems. Their approach to quantum mechanics appears to be fundamentally different from established galactic science. I recommend immediate study of their methodologies. The report was classified at the highest levels because its implications were too dangerous for general knowledge. If humans could improve Imperial technology so dramatically in mere weeks, what did that say about the Empire's claims to technological superiority? The philosophical implications were even more troubling. The Empire's social hierarchy was based on the principle that older, more experienced species were naturally superior to newer ones. But humans were proving that innovation and fresh thinking could be more valuable than accumulated knowledge and established traditions. As the second week of contact concluded, Admiral Zexthera found herself facing the most difficult decision of her military career. Imperial protocol demanded that species demonstrating resistance to integration be subjected to increasingly intense pressure until compliance was achieved. But humans weren't resisting integration. They were proposing to improve it. Admiral, Communications Officer Drex reported, "We're receiving another communication from the Human Coalition. They're requesting permission to send a diplomatic mission to our fleet." A diplomatic mission? Admiral Zextara's mandibles clicked with confusion. They want to visit us? The message indicates they wish to establish formal diplomatic relations between what they term equal interstellar civilizations. They're proposing cultural and scientific exchange programs. The word equal resonated through the bridge like a sonic weapon. In the Empire's 3,000-year history, no species had ever claimed equality with their betters. Species were integrated into the hierarchy according to their technological and cultural development, with primitive species accepting their place at the bottom of the galactic social order. But humans seemed genuinely unaware that they were supposed to be primitive. They behaved as if technological innovation and scientific achievement were more important than age or accumulated power. They treated the Empire not as godlike beings to be worshipped, but as interesting neighbors who had taken different approaches to common problems. This attitude was more subversive than any rebellion, more dangerous than any weapon. It challenged the fundamental assumptions upon which the entire galactic empire was built. As Admiral Zextara watched human spacecraft beginning to explore their own solar system with unprecedented speed and efficiency, she realized that the integration of humanity would not follow any established pattern. These beings were not going to submit to imperial authority, not because they were rebellious, but because they genuinely didn't understand why they should. They were still smiling, and those smiles were becoming increasingly unsettling to beings who had never encountered a species that viewed the mighty galactic empire as just another civilization with some interesting ideas worth studying. The Empire was about to learn what happened when unstoppable force met immovable human curiosity, and the results would reshape the galaxy in ways that none of them could imagine. The third week of First Contact marked the beginning of what Imperial historians would later classify as the Great Paradigm Collapse. What started as confusion had escalated into something approaching panic among the Empire's leadership, while humanity continued their relentless advance into technologies that should have taken them centuries to develop. Admiral Zextara stood in the observation deck of the Eternal Dominion, watching human spacecraft darting through their solar system with movements that defied conventional physics. The ships were small, elegant, and impossibly fast. Worse, they were entirely human-designed, incorporating principles that no Imperial scientist had considered. Report, she commanded Communications Officer Drex, though she dreaded what she might hear. The humans have established permanent research stations on 3 of their outer planets. Drex reported, her compound eyes reflecting the stress that had become endemic throughout the Imperial fleet. Their construction rate exceeds our projections by factors we cannot calculate. They're building infrastructure faster than we can catalog it. This was another impossibility to add to the growing list. Imperial logistics specialists had calculated that establishing even basic research outposts in a hostile environment should take primitive species several standard years. Humans had accomplished it in days, using construction methods that their engineers were still struggling to understand. Dr. Sarah Chun, now serving as Earth's unofficial liaison to the Imperial fleet, had tried to explain their approach during one of the increasingly frequent communication sessions. "We don't build things the way you do," she had said with that unsettling human smile. "You seem to plan everything in advance and then execute those plans methodically. We prefer to start building and figure out the details as we go. It's faster, and we usually end up with better solutions than we originally planned." The concept of building without complete plans was so alien to Imperial methodology that their engineers had required extensive psychological counseling after attempting to understand it. The Empire's approach to construction was based on exhaustive planning, detailed analysis, and careful implementation of proven techniques. The idea of beginning major construction projects with only general objectives and allowing the design to evolve during construction was considered a recipe for disaster. But human construction projects weren't disasters. They were masterpieces of adaptive engineering that solved problems imperial science hadn't even recognized as problems. Their orbital research stations were more efficient than imperial designs despite being built with primitive technology. Their integration of life support, research facilities, and manufacturing capabilities exceeded imperial standards while using significantly fewer resources. The most troubling aspect of human technological development was its decentralized nature. Where imperial research followed hierarchical structures with senior scientists directing the work of junior researchers, humans seemed to operate on principles of organized chaos. Breakthroughs made in one location were instantly shared globally, leading to rapid improvements and iterations that build upon each other at exponential rates. Admiral, reported intelligence coordinator Vexmar, his voice carrying undertones that suggested he was struggling with concepts that challenge his understanding of reality. The humans have established what they call open-source research protocols. All technological developments are being shared freely among their entire species. Admiral Zextara's mandibles clicked in confusion. Shared freely? Without resource exchange or territorial concessions? Correct. They appear to believe that scientific knowledge belongs to their entire species rather than to individuals or institutional hierarchies. The concept of proprietary technology appears to be foreign to them. This revelation sent shock waves through the imperial command structure. The empire's technological development was carefully controlled, with innovations restricted to appropriate security levels and species rankings. The idea that primitive beings would share their most advanced technologies freely among themselves was unprecedented. But the results of this approach were undeniable. Human technological development was accelerating at rates that defied every model in the imperial database. What should have taken them decades to achieve, they were accomplishing in days through collaborative research that involved their entire global population. On Earth, the United Nations had been transformed into something resembling a planetary research coordination center. Secretary General Amara Okafor found herself managing the most ambitious scientific endeavor in human history, coordinating research efforts across every continent and every discipline. The preliminary results from Dr. Nakamura's quantum communication array are extraordinary, she reported to the assembled representatives of Earth's nations. We're achieving instantaneous communication across interplanetary distances with error rates below 0.001%. The implications for coordinating our expansion into space are remarkable. The expansion she referenced was already well underway. Human engineering teams had established mining operations on several asteroids, using techniques that combined imperial gravity manipulation technology with human innovations in automated systems. Their output was exceeding projections so dramatically that imperial economists were struggling to understand how such efficiency was possible. Dr. Robert Harrison, whose innovations in faster-than-light travel had already revolutionized human space capabilities, was working on something that would soon send the imperial fleet into full crisis mode: interstellar exploration. The beautiful thing about space, he explained to his international team during their daily coordination meeting, is that it's mostly empty. Once you understand how to manipulate the quantum foam effectively, you can cover vast distances with relatively small energy expenditures. The aliens' approach works, but it's like using a fire hose when you need a precision instrument. His words were being monitored by Imperial intelligence services, who were becoming increasingly concerned about human technological development. The idea that humans might achieve independent interstellar travel capability within weeks of first contact was beyond their most pessimistic projections. Ambassador Veltar, whose confidence had been steadily eroding since the first day of contact, submitted his latest report to the High Command with growing desperation. The humans have begun what they call Project Starreach. Based on their current development rate, they may achieve interstellar travel capability within the next standard cycle. Their projected destinations include several systems within Imperial territory. The implications were staggering. The Empire had never encountered a situation where a primitive species might achieve interstellar capabilities before being properly integrated into the galactic hierarchy. The legal, political, and social ramifications were beyond anything their systems were designed to handle. High Admiral Torvex convened an emergency session of the Imperial High Command, bringing together representatives from every major species in the Empire. The assembled beings represented thousands of years of accumulated wisdom and experience, but they found themselves facing a problem that had no precedent in galactic history. The humans must be stopped, declared War Coordinator Thakvon, his armored exoskeleton gleaming with aggressive intent. If they achieve interstellar capabilities while maintaining their primitive social structures, they could destabilize the entire galactic order. Stopped how? Asked Intelligence Coordinator Vexmar. Their technological development is occurring simultaneously across their entire planet. We would need to occupy thousands of research facilities across multiple continents. Even if we could achieve such an occupation, their open research protocols mean that crucial knowledge is distributed among millions of individuals. The military implications were indeed daunting. Humans had demonstrated a remarkable capacity for rapid innovation under pressure. Any attempt to forcibly halt their technological development might trigger even more dramatic breakthroughs as they focus their considerable problem-solving abilities on overcoming Imperial interference. But the philosophical implications were even more troubling. If humans achieved interstellar travel independently, they would enter the galactic community as equals rather than as subordinates. They would need to be treated as a sovereign species rather than as primitives requiring guidance and protection. This possibility challenged the fundamental assumptions upon which the Empire was built. The entire imperial system was based on hierarchical relationships between species, with technological capability determining social status. The idea that a species less than a century into their space age could achieve technological parity with civilizations thousands of years their senior was revolutionary in the most dangerous sense. Dr. Sarah Chun, unaware of the crisis her species was causing in the Imperial fleet, was focused on what humans considered the most exciting development in their history. The first human interstellar probe was nearing completion, incorporating technologies that represented a fusion of Imperial innovations and human improvements. The drive system is ready for testing, she reported to President Harrison during their morning briefing. Dr. Petrov's team in Moscow has solved the stability issues we were having with the quantum resonance chambers. We should be ready for launch within 48 hours. President Harrison, who had been briefed on the Imperial fleet's increasing agitation by human intelligence services, chose his words carefully. Dr. Chun, are we certain this won't be interpreted as an aggressive act by our visitors? Chen's expression reflected the puzzlement that had characterized humanity's approach to the aliens since first contact. Why would exploration be considered aggressive? They're explorers themselves, aren't they? I would think they'd appreciate our curiosity about the galaxy. This fundamental misunderstanding of Imperial psychology was at the heart of the crisis. Humans approached space exploration as a natural expression of curiosity and scientific advancement. The Empire viewed it as a carefully controlled expansion of territory and resources regulated by established hierarchies and protocols. The first human interstellar probe launched exactly 3 weeks and 2 days after first contact. It was small, elegant, and impossibly sophisticated for a species that had achieved spaceflight so recently. Its destination was Alpha Centauri, a journey that Imperial vessels could complete, but which would require significant resources and planning. The human probe made the trip in 18 standard hours, using less energy than an Imperial shuttle consumed during atmospheric operations. Its telemetry data, shared openly through human communication networks, provided technical specifications that caused panic among Imperial engineers who realized they were examining technology superior to their own standard systems. But the probe's technical capabilities were less significant than what it represented: humanity's declaration of independence from imperial oversight. They had achieved interstellar travel capability without permission, without guidance, and without acknowledging any need for imperial approval. Admiral Zexthera received the probe's launch notification with something approaching despair. In 3 weeks, her routine integration operation had evolved into the greatest challenge to imperial authority in recorded history. The humans weren't just refusing to submit to imperial hierarchy. They were demonstrating that such hierarchy might be unnecessary. Admiral, Communications Officer Drex reported, "We're receiving another communication from the Human Coalition. They're requesting permission to send diplomatic representatives to several imperial worlds for what they term cultural and scientific exchange." The request was polite, respectful, and absolutely revolutionary. Humans were proposing to visit imperial worlds not as supplicants seeking knowledge, but as equals offering to share their own innovations. The implications were staggering. Ambassador Veltar, whose 6 arms had taken on a permanent posture of distress, provided his analysis of the human proposal. They wished to establish what they call sister city relationships between human settlements and imperial colonies. They're offering to share their construction techniques, agricultural innovations, and manufacturing processes in exchange for what they term cultural enrichment opportunities. The proposal was carefully crafted to appeal to imperial values while subtly challenging imperial assumptions. Humans were offering to improve imperial colonial efficiency while framing their superior technologies as mere different approaches to common problems. But the most unsettling aspect of the human proposal was its assumption that such exchanges would be mutually beneficial. They genuinely believed they had things to teach the mighty Galactic Empire, and the terrifying reality was that they were probably right. As reports continued to arrive from human research facilities across their solar system, one thing became increasingly clear to the imperial observers: the integration of humanity would not follow any established protocol. These beings had achieved in weeks what other species required centuries to accomplish, and they showed no signs of slowing down. Their smiles had not faded. If anything, they had become more confident, more infectious, and more unsettling to beings who had built their entire civilization on the assumption that technological advancement followed predictable patterns. The Empire was about to face its greatest challenge: a species that refused to acknowledge their superiority not out of rebellion or ignorance, but because they genuinely believed that innovation mattered more than age, that fresh perspectives could be more valuable than accumulated wisdom, and that the future belonged to those bold enough to reach for it. The humans were still smiling, and that smile was beginning to spread to other species who were watching the impossible unfold before their eyes. The galaxy itself was about to discover what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable object, and the result would reshape everything they thought they knew about civilization, technology, and the nature of progress itself.